You can wait outside." The words hit me like a calibration error at full production speed. I stood there at the entrance of the ballroom, watching conversations flow around me like I wasn't even there. Glasses clinked. Music played. Nobody rushed to correct her. "My name is Gerald Hayes. I'm 48 years old, and at that moment I was still the senior manufacturing systems engineer at Apex Manufacturing Solutions. 26 years of optimizing their production lines, fixing their bottlenecks, keeping their throughput numbers in the green. 26 years of making sure their systems didn't fail." I tightened my grip on the folder in my hands. Inside were 8 months of specifications, automation protocols, and client documentation. Work that had quietly saved Apex after their near-catastrophic failure on the Anderson contract. Work that had never been mentioned publicly. "Excuse me," I asked, my voice barely registering above the background noise. Patricia Wilson, the company's operations director, glanced at me with the kind of polite impatience you show a machine that's running slightly off-spec. "We're at capacity for the ceremony," she said. "This event is reserved seating." I looked past her into the room. Everyone from my department was already inside. Every engineer, every project manager, even Curtis Palmer, the junior analyst who'd joined less than a month ago. He was adjusting his tie nervously at a round table near the front. I could see my own system diagrams reflected on the screen behind the stage. "I didn't realize I wasn't included," I said. Patricia smiled the way you smile when explaining why a process adjustment won't work. "Gerald, you're a technical contributor. Tonight is for leadership and award recipients. Why would we waste a seat on you?" That sentence hit harder than the first. I followed her gaze to the large projection screen at the front of the room. Manufacturing Excellence Award, the automated assembly system being honored, was mine. Every algorithm, every safety protocol, every efficiency optimization that had increased their output by 47% over the past year. "I understand," I said quietly. I set my folder down on a nearby table, opened my laptop, and typed a single line. Then I hit send. Within seconds, notification chimes began echoing across the ballroom. One phone, then another. A pause in conversation. Murmurs. I closed my laptop and walked away. I didn't always understand that I was being erased. At first, the pattern felt subtle, almost like normal variance in a production cycle. A technical presentation delivered without my name attached. A project summary that mentioned the engineering team instead of the person who designed the core automation systems. Small deviations, easy to excuse if you wanted to believe the system was running fair. When I joined Apex Manufacturing 26 years ago, I believed it was. The company was still family-owned then, run by old-school engineers who understood that good manufacturing came from people who knew their machines. I came in straight from a smaller automotive shop, hired for my ability to untangle complex manufacturing systems and find efficiency where others saw chaos. Within my first year, I rebuilt their main production line control system. Output increased 42%. I redesigned their quality assurance protocols, preventing 3 major recalls that would have cost them millions. None of it was flashy, all of it worked. People noticed, just not publicly. Back then, my immediate supervisor was a guy named Tom Richardson, an old-timer who believed in giving credit where it was due. Tom retired about 15 years ago, and that's when things started changing. His replacement was a younger guy named Randolph Miller, fresh out of business school with an MBA and ideas about optimizing human resources. Randolph had a reputation for refining ideas before they reached the executives. I thought that meant improvement. What it actually meant was ownership transfer. The first time Randolph presented my work without acknowledging me, I assumed it was a systems error. I corrected him afterward, casually. Randolph smiled. "Relax, Gerald. Leadership doesn't care who builds the solution. They care that it delivers results." That phrase followed me for months. Every major breakthrough followed the same process flow. I would identify a bottleneck, design a fix, document everything, and send it up the chain. Weeks later, the solution would reappear in a leadership meeting, rebranded, renamed, and credited elsewhere. Promotions followed, raises followed, just not to me. The pattern became more obvious after my divorce. Sarah and I had been married 22 years, and she'd finally had enough of me prioritizing production schedules over family dinners. "You love those machines more than you love us," she said during one of our final arguments. She wasn't entirely wrong. The divorce was finalized 2 years ago. Sarah got the house. I got a small apartment near the plant, and suddenly I had nothing but time to notice things I'd been too busy to see before. Like how often my innovations appeared in company newsletters with other people's names attached, how my efficiency improvements became departmental initiatives, how my troubleshooting solutions became collaborative breakthroughs. When I finally brought it up with human resources, the response was polite and procedural. They asked whether the work was done during company hours, whether I had used company systems, whether I could prove exclusive authorship beyond timestamps. The implication was clear. If the company benefited, the company decided who received recognition. I learned to stay quiet and keep running the systems, but I also learned to document everything. What they didn't see was how closely I began monitoring the flow after that. I kept original files on personal drives. I documented version histories. I saved meeting invitations, approval emails, and presentation drafts. I noticed how often the same names appeared next to innovations that didn't originate with them. Then, 18 months ago, everything changed. The Richardson family sold Apex to a larger conglomerate called Industrial Solutions Group. New executives arrived with fresh ideas about modernization and streamlining operations. They brought consultants who used words like disruption and optimization without understanding what either actually meant in a manufacturing environment. That's when they told me about Randolph's promotion. At 29 years old, with his MBA and 4 years at the company, he was now senior engineering manager. The position I should have had a decade ago. The position Tom Richardson had practically promised me before his retirement. Think of it as passing the torch. Patricia Wilson explained during the meeting, where they announced my new role. Technical consultant, same work, less authority, no direct reports. A lateral move, they called it. Transition planning, they said. I'd be mentoring Randolph, helping him understand the systems I'd built. Your experience combined with Randolph's fresh perspective will drive innovation. Patricia continued. I smiled and adjusted my wedding ring. I still wore it 2 years after the divorce. Old habits die hard in well-calibrated systems. But something else happened during that meeting. Something they didn't expect. Instead of feeling defeated, I felt clarity. For the first time in years, I could see the entire production line clearly. Input, process, output. They had just shown me exactly how they valued my contribution. And that information was worth more than any promotion. 8 months before the awards ceremony, I started working on something new, but this time I told no one. I began by reaching out to former colleagues who'd left Apex over the years. Casual conversations, catching up over coffee, asking how they were doing in their new positions. What I found was a pattern more consistent than any manufacturing process. Howard Foster had been our infrastructure specialist until 3 years ago. He developed a maintenance prediction system that cut downtime by 35%. The system was still running, still saving Apex thousands every month. But Howard's name had disappeared from all documentation within 6 months of his departure. They called it the Predictive Maintenance Initiative. Howard told me over lunch at a diner near his new job, like it just materialized out of corporate strategy instead of 18 months of data analysis and sensor calibration. Melvin Stone had been our compliance manager before taking a position with a competitor. He'd created a quality assurance framework that had kept Apex clear of regulatory violations for 5 years running. Last month, I'd seen Patricia present our quality excellence program to a client, describing it as if the company had developed it through collaborative management processes. The worst part, Melvin said, wasn't losing credit. It was watching them simplify it until it barely worked, then wonder why quality metrics started slipping. These conversations weren't about revenge. They were about possibility, about what could exist if the people who actually understood manufacturing systems were allowed to build without the translation layer of corporate politics. During the same period, I was quietly developing my own framework. Not a copy of Apex's systems, but something cleaner. Something designed from the ground up to eliminate the inefficiencies that years of corporate compromise had built into their processes. I worked at home, using my own equipment, my own time, my own resources. The divorce settlement had left me with enough savings to invest in proper software licenses and development tools. For the first time in decades, I was building something that belonged entirely to me. The framework started as an exercise in independence, but it became something larger as I realized how many of Apex's clients were struggling with the same fundamental issues. Systems that worked but didn't scale efficiently. processes that delivered results but required constant manual intervention, automation that automated the wrong things while leaving critical bottlenecks untouched. I knew how to fix those problems. More importantly, I knew how much those clients were losing by accepting them. 6 months before the ceremony, I registered Hayes Manufacturing Consulting as an LLC, not because I was planning to leave Apex immediately, but because I wanted to understand what independence would require: business license, liability insurance, client contract templates. I treated it like any other system design problem. Identify requirements, develop processes, test functionality. I also started having different kinds of conversations with industry contacts I'd built over 26 years. Not former Apex employees, but engineers and managers at client companies who actually used our systems day to day. These were the people who called when something went wrong, who knew which processes worked smoothly and which ones required workarounds. "Gerald, can I ask you something?" Roger Coleman from Midwest Automotive had said during one of our routine technical calls. "The integration protocol you set up 3 years ago is still running perfectly, but we've been having issues with the newer modules. They don't seem to follow the same logic structure. That was because they didn't." The newer modules were designed by people who understood the documentation, but not the underlying principles. They worked, but they worked like patches instead of integrated solutions. "If you ever decide to go independent," Roger had continued, "you should know that several of us have talked about what that might look like. Not to steal you away from Apex, but because we'd rather work directly with the person who actually builds these systems." Similar conversations were happening with technical leads at 4 other major clients. Not solicitation, just information. They were telling me, without quite saying it directly, that my relationship with their companies was worth more than Apex's corporate relationship. By the time Randolph started asking me to explain the legacy systems he'd inherited, I had a clear understanding of exactly how much institutional knowledge lived in my head versus Apex's documentation. The answer was most of it. The official procedures captured what the systems did, but not why they did it that way. They explained the current configuration, but not the reasoning behind design decisions. They documented the successful outcomes, but not the failed approaches that had led to the current solutions. Randolph would ask questions like, "Why do we use this particular timing sequence in the assembly protocol?" And I would explain the 6-month troubleshooting process that had identified the optimal intervals. He would nod and take notes, but I could see that he was recording the what, not understanding the why. "Could we speed this up by 15%? He asked during one of our sessions. "Yes," I said, "but you'd increase defect rates by about 8% and create a bottleneck in quality control that would actually slow total throughput." "How do you know that?" "Because we tried it 4 years ago. This became the pattern." Randolph would suggest optimizations that looked good on paper, and I would explain why they wouldn't work in practice. He started treating these explanations like resistance to change rather than institutional memory. The breaking point came 6 weeks before the awards ceremony. Randolph called a department meeting to announce his efficiency optimization initiative. He stood at the front of the conference room with a PowerPoint presentation that looked familiar. Very familiar. After extensive analysis, he began clicking to the first slide. "I've identified several opportunities to streamline our production protocols." The slides that followed were my work, not inspired by my work, not based on my recommendations. They were literally my analysis, my calculations, my process diagrams, reformatted into his template and presented as his strategic insight. I sat in the back of the room, watching my colleagues nod approvingly as Randolph explained concepts I'd developed over months of testing and refinement. He was getting the details mostly right, which meant he'd studied my documentation carefully. But when someone asked about implementation challenges, his answers became vague and theoretical. "We'll need to monitor the transition closely," he said, in response to a question about potential bottlenecks. That was corporate speak for I don't actually know what problems we might encounter. After the meeting, I approached him quietly. "Those process modifications you presented," I said. "We should discuss the timing parameters before implementation." Randolph smiled the way you smile at a machine that's making unnecessary noise. "Gerald, I appreciate your input, but I've got this handled." Sometimes fresh eyes see opportunities that experience might overlook. Fresh eyes, as if 26 years of troubleshooting manufacturing systems was somehow a disadvantage. That afternoon, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Howard Foster. "That conversation we had about consulting opportunities," I said. "I'm ready to have it." The second call was to Melvin Stone. "If you were going to document everything about your current position," I asked, "how long would that take?" The third call was to my employment attorney. I need to understand exactly what my contract allows regarding independent consulting and client relationships. The attorney's review took 2 weeks. The results were better than I'd expected. My non-compete clause was narrowly written and specifically exempted consulting work that didn't directly compete with Apex's core services. My intellectual property agreements covered work done on company time using company resources, but not personal development projects. Most importantly, client relationships I'd built over 26 years weren't considered company property, as long as I didn't use confidential information to solicit business. The key, the attorney explained, is that you can't take their trade secrets, but you can use your general knowledge and industry relationships. If clients want to work with you because they trust your expertise, that's not a legal problem. 3 weeks before the ceremony, I had a series of careful conversations with former colleagues, not about leaving Apex, but about possibilities. About what it might look like if the people who actually understood manufacturing systems could work together without corporate translation layers. Howard was interested, so was Melvin. Curtis Palmer, surprisingly, was the most enthusiastic. You know what the frustrating part is? Curtis said during our conversation, "I joined Apex because I wanted to learn from people like you. Instead, I spend most of my time in meetings about meetings, watching good ideas get watered down by committees." Within a week, I had informal commitments from 7 people, not promises to quit, but agreements to consider alternatives if the right opportunity existed. Howard and Melvin were ready to move immediately. Curtis wanted to wait until he had more experience, but was willing to join a consulting network part-time. Others were interested in contract relationships that would let them work on projects they actually cared about. By the time the Manufacturing Excellence Award nominations were announced, I already knew what was coming. The automated assembly system would be honored. Randolph would be recognized as the innovation lead. My name would appear nowhere in the documentation. I also knew that they didn't understand what they were celebrating. The system they were honoring wasn't just the automation protocols. It was the integration architecture that connected 6 different manufacturing processes, the predictive maintenance algorithms that prevented downtime, and the quality control feedback loops that maintained consistency across multiple product lines. That architecture existed primarily in my head and in files they'd never seen. The night of the ceremony, I arrived early and parked across the street. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching colleagues arrive in their best suits and dresses, laughing and chatting as they walked toward the building. Through the lobby windows, I could see the large projection screen displaying system diagrams I'd drawn by hand 18 months earlier. I opened my laptop and reviewed the email one final time. 4 attachments, each precisely calibrated for maximum impact. The first was my resignation letter. Short, professional, citing the contract clause that allowed immediate departure when project scope changed without disclosure, effective at the end of the business day. The second attachment contains 7 resignation letters from senior contributors Apex depended on more than leadership realized. Howard Foster from his current position. Melvin Stone, Curtis Palmer, 3 others from different departments who'd grown tired of watching their work disappear into corporate messaging. And 1 from Sandra Mitchell, a quality control supervisor I'd worked with for 15 years who shared my last name but wasn't related to me. The third attachment was a technical summary, not my complete framework, just enough to demonstrate where their celebrated innovation had actually originated. Time-stamped development files, version histories, independent analysis that showed the difference between company documentation and the actual system architecture. The fourth attachment was the most important: client notifications. Carefully worded disclosure letters to 4 key manufacturing partners, informing them that I was departing Apex and launching an independent consulting practice. No solicitation, no criticism of Apex, just professional notification that their primary technical contact was transitioning to independent practice. Each letter ended with the same sentence: "If you have questions about system continuity or alternative consulting services, I'm available to discuss options." I walked into the building and approached the ballroom entrance. Patricia Wilson was checking names against a list, directing people to their assigned tables. The room beyond was elegant, filled with round tables and soft lighting. Everyone from my department was already seated near the front. That's when she said it. "You can wait outside," and that's when I sent the email that would change everything. Within seconds, notification chimes began echoing across the ballroom. One phone, then another, a pause in conversation. Murmurs. I closed my laptop and walked toward the elevator as the ceremony dissolved behind me. By the time I reached the lobby, My phone was vibrating. I didn't answer it. I stepped outside into the cool night air and waited for the second wave, the realization phase. That was when people stopped reacting and started calculating. What happened inside Apex after I left wasn't chaos. Not immediately. At first, it was confusion. The ceremony resumed awkwardly. The award was still announced. Applause happened a half-second too late. Smiles didn't quite hold their calibration. Then the legal department opened the attachments. That's when the frequency changed. Resignations triggered review protocols. Client disclosures triggered risk assessments. The technical summary triggered something more dangerous: recognition. Anyone who looked at it could see the truth immediately. The company's most celebrated innovation rested on an incomplete understanding of its own systems, and the person who fully understood them had just walked away. The first call came before I reached my car. I didn't look at the screen. When something breaks gradually, leadership waits. When it breaks structurally, they panic. By Monday morning, the magnitude of the problem was becoming clear, not just to Apex, but to their clients. Minor anomalies had started appearing in production monitoring systems over the weekend. Nothing catastrophic, just enough friction to trigger alerts on the client side. Engineers at those companies began tracing issues upstream. They always led back to the same place: knowledge that lived primarily in my head. Roger Coleman from Midwest Automotive called first. "Gerald," he said, "I understand you're no longer with Apex. We've been told everything is stable, but my team says the automation architecture depends on decisions only you fully understand." I let the silence stretch. "We're not looking to breach anything," Roger added. "We just need to know what options exist if continuity becomes an issue." That was the real question. Not will you help us, but what exists beyond this. I told him the truth, that I was building something independent, that it wasn't yet operational, that when it was, it wouldn't be a replica of Apex's system, but a cleaner framework designed to eliminate the compromises that caused these dependencies in the first place. He didn't interrupt. At the end of the call, he said, "Keep us informed." Similar conversations happened with 3 other major clients over the next 48 hours, all initiated by them, all documented by me, all handled without promises or solicitation. Inside Apex, panic was hardening into urgency. Patricia Wilson called offering a retention bonus, then a title, then equity language that hadn't existed before. Randolph sent a message that tried to sound human. "Gerald, you didn't have to do it like this." He was wrong. This was the only way it could have happened. Because if I had warned them, if I had negotiated, they would have delayed, diluted, redirected. They always had. The meeting request arrived on a Friday morning. No subject line, just a calendar block sent from the executive office. Marked mandatory, scheduled for early afternoon. No agenda, no dial-in link, in person only. When I arrived at Apex's headquarters, the building felt different. Conversations stopped when I passed. People avoided eye contact, not out of hostility but calculation. Word had spread faster than leadership expected. The conference room was already full. Randolph sat near the far end of the table, hands folded too tightly. Patricia Wilson was there along with 2 senior legal counsel and someone I hadn't met before. A woman in a neutral suit who didn't introduce herself. Board representation, most likely. Patricia gestured to an empty chair. "Thank you for coming, Gerald." I sat. She didn't waste time. "We underestimated your role. That admission would have meant something once. Now it sounded procedural." Patricia continued, "Your resignation created exposure we didn't anticipate. Client confidence is unsettled." The lawyer slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed copies of my documentation, the same files I had attached to the email. They had been reviewed carefully now, annotated, highlighted. "We'd like to discuss options," Patricia said. "Retention, revised scope, direct reporting structure." Randolph finally spoke. "We can correct the record. Publicly, correct the record." I looked at him. "You mean acknowledge that the Manufacturing Excellence Award was based on work I designed and implemented?" He hesitated. "We can discuss appropriate recognition." The board representative leaned forward. "Gerald, what you built is valuable, but value doesn't have to come at the cost of organizational alignment." I met her gaze. "Alignment with what?" "With the collaborative structure that allows innovation to scale," she said finally. That was the core of it. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing the structure that allowed innovations to be absorbed without accountability. Patricia exhaled slowly. "What would it take for you to stay?" I didn't answer immediately, not to be dramatic, but because I wanted to be accurate. I won't, I said at last, but I'll be clear. I didn't leave because of compensation. I left because the system here treats contribution as raw material and recognition as a privilege. You can adjust titles, you can adjust reporting lines, but you won't change that system. Patricia didn't deny it. What happens next, I continued, is up to you. I am not soliciting your clients. I'm not attacking your company. I'm simply no longer preventing the consequences of decisions you've been insulated from. The board representative closed her folder. You understand this will escalate? Yes, I said. That's why I prepared. I stood, nodded once and left. Behind me, no one tried to stop me this time. 1 year later, I walked into a different conference room. This one belonged to an industry consortium, a gathering of engineers, operators, and decision-makers who cared more about systems that actually worked than corporate hierarchies. I hadn't asked to be on the program. I had been invited. Hayes Manufacturing Consulting had grown differently than I expected. Slowly, intentionally. We didn't scale by acquiring people. We scaled by clarity. Every system we built could be explained by more than one person. Every decision had a name attached to it, not for blame, but for ownership. Clients noticed, not because we marketed harder, but because they no longer had to guess who understood their manufacturing processes. When Midwest Automotive had a problem, they called me directly. When their production metrics improved, they knew exactly who to thank. Apex still existed. Companies like that rarely collapse completely, but it had changed shape. Several executives had quietly moved on, manufacturing contracts had thinned. Innovation announcements sounded cautious now, layered with disclaimers. Randolph Miller had been let go within 6 months. The systems he couldn't fully understand had started failing in small but expensive ways. Without the institutional knowledge to troubleshoot effectively, problems that I would have resolved in hours took them days or weeks. When I finally stepped onto the stage at the consortium meeting, I didn't tell my story the way people expected. I didn't name Apex. I didn't describe the ceremony. I didn't mention the email. Instead, I spoke about structural risk, about how organizations fail not when they lose talent, but when they mistake silence for stability. About how systems built on uncredited labor eventually forget how they function. At the end, I said something simple. The most dangerous assumption any company can make is that the people holding things together will always stay quiet. As I left the venue, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. Apex is restructuring again. They finally understand what they lost. I read it, then locked my phone. Understanding arrives late for some systems, too late to recover what mattered. I didn't feel satisfaction or bitterness or triumph. What I felt was steady state. I no longer needed recognition from people who couldn't see my value. I had built something that didn't require permission to exist. Value doesn't grow in silence. It grows when you choose where to place it. I used to believe that if I stayed quiet and worked harder, things would eventually become fair. This experience taught me something different. Fairness doesn't happen to you. You create it by understanding your own worth and refusing to let others define it for you. The wedding ring still sits in my apartment drawer now. I stopped wearing it 6 months ago, not because I was angry about the divorce, but because I was finally ready to build something new. Something that belonged entirely to me. Sometimes former Apex employees call, asking about opportunities. I'm always willing to talk, especially with people who understand the difference between building systems and managing perceptions. The manufacturing industry needs people who know how things actually work, not just how they're supposed to work on paper. My consulting firm isn't trying to become the next Apex. We're trying to be something better. A place where technical competence matters more than political skill, where solutions are valued over presentations, and where the people who build the systems get to sign their names to the work. It turns out that when you stop waiting for permission to be valued, a lot of other things become possible too. The biggest mistake companies make isn't losing good people, it's teaching them they're replaceable while proving they're actually irreplaceable. You don't need their permission to succeed. You just need to stop giving them permission to define your worth.